To get into camel pose, I highly recommend using a blanket underneath the knees as well as a bolster. Now, there are a few different ways that we can get into camel pose. And if you have any knee sensitivity, as I said, I highly recommend placing a blanket underneath your knees. Another way is to roll the blanket, and if you have any instep sensitivity, you can place your insteps on top of the blanket as well. To get into camel pose, one way is to come up onto your knees, tuck your toes underneath you, and sit back onto your heels. Place your palms on your heels and work your shoulder blades in towards each other. Now, instead of sticking the rib cage out, you'll draw the rib cage in and feel an invisible line lifting your heart up towards the sky. From here, one option is to use a bolster to reach the arms back towards your bolster. Feel a subtle lift of your heart, working the shoulder blades in. Keep your drishti, that means your gaze, slightly in front of you so your head is not dropping backwards and collapsing onto the cervical spine. Resist the urge to press the hips forward and instead keep feeling a subtle lift through the heart. Another way to get into camel pose without props is to place your palms on top of your heels and work your shoulder blades in towards each other. As you do this, feel a subtle lift through the heart and feel that line of energy lifting you up towards the sky without collapsing into the low back. The hips will naturally start to move forward if you focus on lifting the heart up towards the sky. Keep breathing in through the spaciousness and feel a subtle lift moving from the midline of the belly all the way through the crown. To get out of this shape, you can draw the navel in and follow the natural S curve of your lower lumbar, coming to a seat on top of the heels or on top of your instep. I like to use a bolster when I come into wheel pose. So let's set the bolster up overhead. As you come down to the earth, feel spaciousness move across the shoulder blades and across the elbows. Keep your palms as wide as your mat or as wide as your bolster. Now, I highly recommend using the bolster against a wall, so that way you have stability. I like to place my hands on top of the bolster and support my crown as I lift into this shape. Keep in mind that the knees are a little bit wider than the hips. And as you press your big toe mounds down to the earth, feel that subtle lift moving through the heart. Come up to the crown first, work your shoulder blades in, and keep your palms as wide as the bolster. This allows spaciousness for the shoulder blades and the shoulder girdle to move towards the midline of your spine. Once again, keep sending your heart, this time to the back wall. You'll press through the big toe mounts and notice that the head is not dropping. Staying for a few rounds of breath here. You can slowly start to bend the elbows, lowering your crown to the top of the bolster, rolling through the spine, and then allowing the hips to come down to the earth. To come into Sphinx pose, you'll start on your belly and then roll the tops of your thighs in towards each other, pressing the tops of the toes into the mat. You can draw the elbows in line with your shoulders and press down through the forearms as you feel a subtle lift through the belly, up through the chin, and out through the crown. We also call this pose TV watching pose. If this doesn't feel good for your lower lumbar, you can always bring the arms a little bit wider in front of you, or bring this a little bit out to the side, keeping your drishti slightly towards the mat. There are a few options that we can take for bridge pose. One option, as we lay down, is to take a passive or restorative bridge. As you lift your hips up, you can take the block and place it underneath the flat part of your back, known as the sacrum. This is a great pose to elongate the low lumbar and feel that sense of supportedness as you open up the heart and open up the chest. If active bridge is something that calls you, we'll press the triceps into the earth with the fingertips reaching up. Lift your hips, pressing the back of the crown into the earth. Rolling the shoulder blades in towards one another, you can work the fingers to clasp the palms and feel that subtle lift of your pelvic floor. Be mindful that the thighs are not overextended, but instead work the big toe mounds into the earth and draw the energy of the inner thighs in towards each other. Child's pose is a great variation to practice with or without your bolster. To practice child's pose with a bolster, you'll come to have the big toes touch with your knees slightly wide. Let your belly fall on top of your bolster and let your palms walk alongside the very top. You can place one ear towards your bolster and feel the energy move down the spine as you elongate the sacrum. Feel free to turn your head to the opposite side if this feels comfortable. If you'd like to take child's pose without the bolster, simply walk the big toes in towards each other, reach the arms forward, and place your forehead onto the mat. You can also draw your hands alongside your feet, rounding the shoulders. Melting heart is also known as puppy pose, and I like to take this with a bolster as a support. To get into melting heart or puppy pose, we'll walk the knees underneath our hips and be mindful not to let the pelvis slouch or tilt forward. You can draw your forearms on top of the bolster, and as you work your heels to move back and your hips to align over your knees, you'll let the arms slightly elongate in front of you. The key here is to have the forehead supported and to draw the rib cage in and upwards. This is a great shape to open up the heart, and if it feels good for you, you can even cross the palms behind the head and clasp in prayer pose. To come into fish pose, we'll lay our bodies down, and from here, walk your inner ankles towards each other. Press your triceps into the ground and let your fingertips reach up. Lift the heart and the rib cage and let the back of your crown touch the earth. You can press your hands alongside you and work the shoulder blades in. As your crown presses down, you can lift your legs or lift the arms for a more advanced variation. For bow pose, you take your blanket and place it right underneath your pelvis, where your sacral chakra is. Let's take a moment to place our palms down. You can rock your hips side to side. And for bow pose, you can start by reaching one leg back and holding onto the top of your foot. Draw the other heel towards your buttock. You can flip the palms towards the inside with the thumbs pointing up towards the big toes. It's important to keep your drishti or your gaze slightly in front of you as you kick your feet into your hands and lift the front torso. The blanket underneath my pelvis acts as a cushion for my sacral chakra. Keep kicking your feet into your hands, and remember to only take this as far as your spine and your anatomy allows you. To come into reclined hero's pose, first, let your heels meet outside of the hips. Feel a subtle lift of your pelvic floor and align your bolster directly behind you. If there's any knee sensitivity, feel free to skip this pose. Feel a line of energy lifting from the heart, and very slowly keep working the shoulder blades in towards each other as you carefully lower yourself down. You can draw the arms alongside you, and you might even feel the inner thighs and the tops of the thighs stretching here. Reclined hero's pose like this can feel a bit advanced for many of us. So a great way is to use the props. You can take the same variation by setting the block up 1/3 of the way down, placing a blanket underneath your knees, working the heels outside of your hips, and supporting the top of the crown. The key is to feel spaciousness and love within these poses, not to push yourself beyond where your body can handle. I like to use the blocks alongside my heels for eagle pose. The first thing we'll do is reach our seat all the way back, coming into chair pose. From here, we can bring the palms to the heart center and let's lift that right leg up. Shift your weight over to the left foot and place that right foot on top of the block outside of the left foot. Reach the arms out to the side and hug that left elbow on top of your right, opposite arm to leg. You can hold on to the shoulder blades or work the backs of the hands or the palms towards each other. The key here is not to struggle. Slide your elbows up as you move your hips down. And if it feels good for your body, you can take that leg off and single or double wrap. Feel a little lift of the elbows and the pelvic floor, and you can take this into a folded eagle by letting the elbows and the knees touch, separating the shoulder blades. Keep your drishti or gaze on one point and slowly make your way back up. Unwind the arms, and don't forget to try this to the opposite side.